All right, we're back live on the Andre Duke Show with Carter Smith, going over some topics today. How you doing, Carter?
I'm doing all right, man. It's been a pretty solid week. Woke up this morning. I had my kids over the weekend, and my oldest had like a fever and was kind of sick one day. And then yesterday, my youngest had a runny nose and was coughing. And I wake up this morning with a sore throat and a headache. And I'm like, God, it's. I thought this was the time of year they're not supposed to get sick, but it's just you have kids, they're sick all the time, and then you get sick all the time. It's ridiculous. But I'm hanging in there, man. I'm hanging in there. How about you?
Right on. Same here. Can't complain. Had a good weekend. Had a birthday party for my son. He just turned 5, so
Hell yeah,
we
man. That's awesome. What'd you guys do?
just had a party at the house,
Nice.
pizza and all that fun
Yeah.
stuff. Who would
Well,
have
happy
thought?
belated birthday to your little one, man. That's awesome. Father's Day
Yeah.
weekend and a birthday. That's a good weekend, man.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And we got it going on. If you want to go ahead and
Nice.
take the lead on this one today,
Yeah,
Carter.
man. No, I was just yeah. So obviously, we're in the middle of list season. We're in the middle of the summer. There's not a whole lot going on at these programs at college football, sports in general. Obviously, NBA Finals is over, which I don't think anybody really cared about. Celtics 1-5, so woohoo, good for them. I did see Edmonton came back and they took the series back to Edmonton. It's 3-2 in the NHL playoffs, so that's cool. Might have to catch Game 6 and see if they can send it to a Game 7. But other than that, man, I mean, big things coming out today are obviously it's Elite 11 time. So the quarterback camp, Elite 11 that they've been doing for the past couple weeks, months, narrowing it down to who the top 11 guys are across the country. They're all out in Los Angeles competing to see who's going to win that competition. And the rankings from day one came out, and let me put it on the screen here for you. But I found a couple things a little interesting. It's pretty cool actually. I think there's some names on there that people are going to know, and definitely some opportunities for programs to get better. So let me put this on there. All right. Yeah. So obviously, as you can see here, the top dog, the alpha, the number one guy from day one was none other than Tavian St. Clair out of Ohio. He's the Ohio State big time recruit. Went out there and just balled out today from everything I read. I mean, I know my brother and nephew went down to the Elite 11 competition when I was here in town and saw him perform and put on a show. Dude can just spin it. He's an absolute beast. I mean, Ryan Day continues to prove that when it comes to recruiting high end talent, he's one of the best in the world at it. They got Julian Sane out of the transfer portal, Aaron Nolan last year, and now they're looking at bringing in Tavian St. Clair, who might be the best quarterback in the country. Um, and it's just a really cool thing for him to be named the Alpha Dog week one or day one.
Right. And looking at a couple of the other guys on the list, I mean it's day one, but Deuce Knight, number 10 out of
Yeah, Deuce
11.
Knight. Yeah, I mean there's more than 11 there. There's a couple, there's about 20 kids there, but having him at number 10 is interesting, and I've seen a couple other rankings that had him as high as number 6. Um, even to just be in this class of quarterback is an honor, and tells you the kind of talent that they are. So Notre Dame fans, people that are rooting for Deuce Knight, I wouldn't be worried about him being only number 10 on this list. I think he's ranked like the number 7 quarterback in the nation. So not that all these guys are ranked above him on the composite scores or anything like that. But 7 to 10, that falls in line with kind of where people have evaluated him, and that's a great class of kids to be with. Everything I've read about him was that he had probably the strongest arm in the competition, just launching deep balls. Being a lefty, it kind of gave some of the receivers problems with the way that the ball comes out of the hand and the way that it travels through the air. Some of the receivers had trouble with that. But his body control was amazing. He looked clean in the pocket. He looked good. His fundamentals were great. So everything that I read was really positive for him. And so to be top 10 at this competition is a great thing for Notre Dame and for Deuce Knight himself.
And is there anybody else that is on this list that pops out at you? For me, it would be Julian Lewis.
Julian Lewis is another one. Yeah, definitely. I think for me, Julian Lewis is up there, the SC kid. That's obviously somebody that um, is somebody that Notre Dame potentially is going to have to worry about, and the Big Ten is going to have to worry about, and hopefully for USC's sake, all of college football is going to have to worry about. He's polished. He seems to be really good. His footwork's good. Everything looks good from what I've read of coming out of today. Or coming out of day one, I guess. And so Julian Lewis is one. Matt Zollers really impressed me from what I saw clip wise and just what he's done at the competition. Had a lot of wow moments, a lot of strong, deep throws. But then he would miss a couple here that should be pretty easy throws. So I think Matt Zollers is one that I really like. And if he can get developed, I think he could be an elite quarterback in the college football. And so for Missouri to land a kid like that would be huge for that program. Everybody else on the list, for the most part, is kind of who you expected. I think Iowa State's kid, Alex Semansky, is an interesting one. I didn't have him very high on my list or somebody that I had paid a lot of attention to. The other one that's not on this list that I was impressed with was Achilles Smith Jr., who obviously Achilles Smith played in the NFL for a while. He didn't look that great from the clips I saw. I thought he would look better than that. But overall, I mean, the guys on this list are kind of who you thought they would be. You have your Bama, A&M, Georgia, Texas, SC, Notre Dame, Ohio State. I mean, pretty much the guys that are the top ranked guys are the ones that are at the top of this list.
Right. And I think that a thing that's really underrated here is the Missouri Tigers. The last, I don't know, I think they've had a sneaky good run the last 11 months. I mean, they had that huge victory over Ohio State in the bowl game. So I would be shocked if Missouri puts it together and does something really special this year.
Yeah, they've got a pretty solid returning group there, and they're recruiting pretty well for what the program is. So I wouldn't be shocked to see them kind of weasel their way into the middle of that SEC tier and fight for a playoff spot. Maybe not this year, but in the next couple years, be fighting for a playoff spot pretty consistently. And just to throw this up here, I did see this. The actual Elite 11's ranked Deuce as number 3. 24/7 is where I grabbed this graphic from. I've seen him as low as 11 or 10 and as high as 3, usually somewhere in the 6 to 10 range. But yeah, he definitely performed well today. So I was really impressed with Deuce Knight and just everything that I saw from him, which we'll talk more about him later on in the show, because there is some interesting comments and news that came out with him. And obviously we've talked at length about his commitment and whether or not it's a strong commitment or not. And we'll get into that a little later. But yeah, just overall, the Elite 11 is an interesting thing. I love watching clips of it. Obviously, not going to fly out to LA to watch it, but I do go when it's in town, and it's really cool to see those kids that are highly recruited, highly touted, go out there and compete against one another to kind of really prove who's the overall best, at least thrower of the ball in this kind of on air, not a real game situation.
Yeah, and the routes on air, in a lot of times too, when it comes to these evaluations, and for some of these kids, this is the first time of them being in a pressure cooker, big bright lights situation. For some, maybe not all, but for some of them it is, and you only get so many throws at things like these, and I think a lot of times you get some of the beat guys that do these evaluations are they hold grudges and they kind of pick and choose sometimes. So let's keep that in the back of the mind as well.
Yeah, obviously, I know everybody who reports on this event or reports on college football in general has, some inherent biases against either programs, kids, whatever it is. That's going to come through no matter what. But overall, really solid performance by all the kids on this list, and especially obviously Tavian Sinclair went out and lit it up, which I expected. I fully expect he's going to quote unquote win the Elite 11 competition. Just from what I've seen from him and what I know about him. But I think Deuce Knight's got a fighting shot to get in the mix, and obviously Keelan Russell and some of those other big name guys are going to be in the mix as well. But kind of shifting gears here as we continue down list season. I wanted to see what your thoughts on this were because I saw this today. I believe it's also from this one's from CBS Sports, I believe. But they ranked the 24 most impactful coaching hires ahead of the 2024 season. And I thought it was a little interesting. Some of the guys they had on this list, and just here, let me throw it up for you for anybody that hasn't seen it. I thought it's let me get it for you. There you go. So obviously, we'll start kind of at the bottom of the list here. Blake Baker, new defensive coordinator, he's going to be big for LSU. Obviously, LSU is heading into a big year, obviously replacing their OC and now their DC, losing the Heisman winner in Jaden Daniels, and Brian Kelly's already been on the woe is me train about not buying players and kind of setting the groundwork for maybe a less than stellar year, which I promise that's not my Brian Kelly hatred. I believe LSU might be a little down this year, not like 8-4 down, but probably 10-2 or something like that, 9-3. As you go through it, yeah, go ahead.
I'll jump in on Brian Kelly. The thing that when he gave that interview a couple weeks ago about the not buying players thing,
yeah.
If you're going to tell me that locker room looks like that and you can't fundraise, you can't get out there, get your ass off the couch and do something about this, there, Brian, Mr. Family, you're in over your head. And LSU has I think one of the top rosters in all of college football. Maybe not top 10, but they could at least make some noise and do something. And I think, with Coach O, it was going downhill. But Brian, to me, Coach Kelly is already putting in built-in excuses. And this is the fundraising. In people can say it's not pay for play or whatever it is. It's 100% pay for play. This is what this is. This is the new college football. So you're either going to adapt to it or die. Look at what's happening at Clemson.
You're either gonna be Ryan Day, or Debo Sweeney, right? So
Debo Sweeney and Ryan Daly. I like it.
God damn, Dabo. Man, I told you I'm under it today. I'm struggling. But yeah, Dabo or Ryan Day, like those are the two polar opposites of the spectrum, right? And so, but if you watch if you watch Brian Kelly at Notre Dame, you're used to this. This is what he does. He makes excuses for when his teams are less than what they should be. And then when he is there for 10 years and figures out he can't get it done, he'll leave and go somewhere else.
He ain't gonna be there 10 years. I know that.
Well, yeah. They won't put up with it like Notre Dame did. But as we go through the list, I'm going to go through a couple of them kind of quick because I don't have a whole lot to say. I think Jedd Fisch at Washington. Washington just went to the Natty. They aren't a perennial power. I think it's a big hire, obviously replacing Kalen DeBoer and trying to figure out what's next for that program. I don't know a whole lot about Jedd Fisch. I know, a little bit about his time and interactions with certain people that I know. And then I also know that he did a pretty good job at Arizona. So I think he's got a chance to do a pretty good job at Washington too.
I think when it comes to the Jedd Fisch hire, they have a new AD. So I feel like Jedd Fisch can kind of reset a whole new narrative here. Going forward, they have a new athletic director, new head coach. brought in a whole bunch of guys from Arizona. So I feel like Washington is in a good spot. They're starting a new conference, in which I think, as a program going forward, that's something that you would want to have just a clean slate. You don't have any holdovers. You don't have an AD. When you have a new AD and an existing head coach, you don't have to
Mhm.
worry about any friction. So I think everybody at Washington could be on the same page.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's got a good chance. Unfortunately, I think he's going from a weaker conference to a much stronger conference, so it might not get off to the hot start that he wants. I think he's going to kind of struggle his first couple years in the Big Ten. He's just not used to that level of ball as a head coach, and I'm not sure if the kids that they brought in from Arizona are up to that talent level, but I think they have a good chance to kind of set the foundation early and build something there that could be pretty good. Obviously, Michigan State is a whole mess. You have the whole situation that happened with Mel Tucker, jerking off to a sexual assault victim and whatnot. So he had to go. Turns out he might win some money out of that because maybe it was consensual. But regardless of all that, I think Jonathan Smith's a good hire. I like him as a coach. I think he has potential. I don't think he's walking into a great situation. He was able to get the quarterback from Oregon State to come with him, so have a little familiarity there. But overall, I think that's more of a rebuild than seeing that this season being competitive in an expanded Big Ten that's going to be pretty difficult.
And I don't know how well Michigan State is. I feel like it's a tough job. I've heard people talk at length about that they have a kind of, not necessarily like a culture problem, but you got the last. I believe it was not last year, the year before, they had the big brawl in the tunnel at Michigan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Um, so I
yeah.
think you got some issues and uh, um, some corrections that you got to get out of there as far as issues at Michigan State. So I think I wouldn't have too high of expectations going forward for Jonathan Smith and the Michigan State Spartans. I just feel like you got to turn that culture around. And if you guys are watching out there, hit the like and subscribe button. It helps grow the show as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That Michigan tunnel is a whole mess. They need to do something about that. And honestly, the fact that they haven't, I don't care. I really, Michigan fans can be pissed if they want, but if you're gonna talk shit in that tunnel, you deserve to get your ass beat or at least have a fight. I'm for it. Let the kids take care of it themselves. Obviously, I know that was a different situation. They like jumped a kid or something, but regardless, that shouldn't even be a thing. It's ridiculous that happens. Obviously, we've talked a little bit about Mike Elko at A&M because they are week one hosting Notre Dame under the lights at Kyle Field, so that'll be a big game. I think A&M is in an interesting position. I think they have talent on the roster. Mike Elko comes in, a fairly successful defensive coach. Obviously, Notre Dame fans know him a little bit from his time at Notre Dame, and he wasn't the most successful defensive coordinator at that time, but he was successful elsewhere, and obviously he did a good job at Duke. So he'll come in, and I think he'll kind of fix some of the culture issues that Jimbo Fisher left behind pretty quickly. And I think that's a huge hire for A&M. If A&M wants to compete in the SEC, now that they've added Texas and Oklahoma, and they already have to compete with Alabama, Georgia, LSU every year, that's going to be a huge hire. It has to pan out for them. Otherwise, they're going to be set back a decade.
Right, and I echo that same thought. Mike Elko, I think there's only been a handful of guys in the last 50 years that have had multiple wins at Duke, over 8 or 9 wins, and I believe Spurrier was one of them. Maybe one of the last guys to do it back in the early 80s, maybe late 70s. So I think Mike Elko's a really good manager of a roster. I think he understands the defensive side of the football very well. And if you go back and look, they completely punched Clemson in the mouth last year. I watched that game in its entirety. I bet Clemson to win that game. They were a 7-point favorite on the road, and they got absolutely dog walked.
Yeah.
So
no, I agree completely. I think that could be a big time hire for them.
And the last thing I got on it is the Notre Dame fans out there. You cannot take Texas A&M lightly. It's college game day, week 1, game 1. This is a huge game in the program going forward for Mike Elko.
Absolutely. It sets the tone for his whole year and his whole tenure starting out week 1. Number 5 or 4 on this list is the new co-defensive coordinator, Travarius Robinson. I think it's a good hire. I like him. I don't have a whole lot to say on it because, to be honest with you, I don't think it's that impactful. It could be as far as recruiting, and I know he's a good coach and things like that. But at the end of the day, Kirby Smart runs that team and runs that defense. It's similar to, we'll get into it in number 1 there, but when you have a defensive head coach that's proven himself the way Kirby has to win national championships and to do what he's done, I think it's a good hire. And I'm not discounting it. I just don't think it's going to be that impactful. It's not going to change Georgia's program a whole lot because that program's already the elite of the elite.
Right. And I agree with you 100%. I just feel like Kirby runs that defense, and there's nothing really more you can add to it. Not that I don't think he'll have an impact on it, but he will have an impact in some form or capacity.
Of course, yeah. And then number 3 on this list, which was probably my most baffling one, is Willie Fritz at Houston. I understand it. I know, he's got potential to be a good coach. He's been successful. I just don't think anybody in the world gives a fuck about Houston football. So I don't know how that's going to impact the 2024 season. Like, if you're ranking impact on the college football landscape in 2024, Houston is not going to play a part in the college football landscape in any way. They're not going to be fighting for playoff spots. They're not going to upset anybody if they do get in. Like, it's just that it's impactful for the program because they have an opportunity to try to get back to what they were with Tom Herman, which was flash in the pan success. But I don't. Is it more impactful than Mike Elko? I don't think so. Is it more impactful than Jonathan Smith? Probably in the 2024 season, but beyond that, no.
Here's where we disagree. I think this is a huge hire because there's been people coming down to Houston and taking the top players out of there, like Texas, like A&M.
Yeah.
And the big thing for me is that Willie Fritz was at Tulane, and I don't know how many people are well versed in Tulane's academic policies, but they're pretty similar to Notre Dame in a way, and they just don't let anybody in there. Reading and writing is a requirement to go there. So if he could have multiple 10-win seasons at Tulane, it took him a little bit to get there, but if he can get it together at Tulane, I feel like there's more wealth of talent in Texas, and Houston had been down. And last year, Dana Holgorsen, I think if he beats Texas, he might not get fired. But I think Willie Fritz is a hell of a hire for the University of Texas, and I don't think they'll be super duper competitive this year, but I do think that he's going to turn that roster over, and he's going to get kids in there that can play. Now, maybe 3-4 years. He wasn't a sexy hire because he's an older gentleman. So,
yeah. I mean, I understand what you're saying. For me, the University of Houston's football program doesn't move the needle in college football. So I don't. That's great. If he gets them in competitive, that'll be great. I don't think at the end of the day it really matters. Because even with the wealth of talent in Texas, even with the money that the Houston boosters and alumni have, I don't see them ever competing with a Texas, Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State. So at the end of the day, Houston got a good coach, proven that he can be successful building a program at Tulane. Hopefully he can do that for Houston, turn them into a 10-win program that's fighting for playoff spots every year. Hopefully he doesn't do what Tom Herman does and leave for Texas or leave for a bigger job after a couple years, because if he turns Houston around, that's going to be what's on the table. It's these big jobs that are going to be able to offer more money, more resources, everything like that. So I agree he's a good hire. I just don't see the impact it's going to have on the national landscape of college football. But Overall, yeah, I like the hire.
Right. I think that's a wait and see. I think that's a definite wait and see, and we'll see how it goes because I think Tulane is a really hard spot to win at, and he beat SC in a bowl game at Tulane. So,
Yep. We know how bowl games go. If it's not a playoff game, is it really even worth it?
he beat Caleb Williams.
Hey, a lot of people beat Caleb Williams. But anyways, number 2 on this list, I think, was the 1 and 2 are probably the. I mean, I would have had them both 2. Not 100% sure I would have had them in this order, but I think I don't argue with the order. Obviously, Kalen DeBoer stepping in for Nick Saban at Alabama is just hugely impactful in college football. The GOAT leaves the university, and what they say, you never want to follow the legend. Well, he's been tasked with that job. Started out rocky, lost a lot of players to the transfer portal, but he's picked it up ever since then. He's brought in kids through the transfer portal, and he's really killing it in recruiting recently. So I think that's a huge hire for Alabama to keep them at the level, maybe not at the level Nick Saban had them at. That's going to be damn near impossible to meet that. What was it, 6 or 7 national titles in 13 years or something, or whatever it was. But that's going to be impossible to try to maintain. But to keep them in the national conversation, going to Final Fours, going to national championship games, winning natties every now and then, I think that's a huge hire for that program. He's proven that he can do it at Washington. Alabama has a wealth of resources, a wealth of talent already on the roster. So he's walking into a pretty good situation. I don't think there's any issue there. And I think he's a really good coach. The only thing I would say is I know for a fact he wasn't their first choice. So the fact that he is the coach and was maybe their second choice, probably their third choice, is a little room for caution there, just because I don't like when programs that are that big don't get the guy they want. But he's a very good coach, so I don't doubt that he's going to have success there, and his presence as head coach there will be hugely impactful on college football.
Where I'm at on this, I would say this is probably in the last 5 years the biggest coaching hire outside of Ryan Day replacing Urban Meyer.
And that was 5 years ago.
So where I'm at on this, I think Kalen DeBoer is up against it, and no matter what he does, some people are never going to be satisfied, and there are a lot of college football fans that do live in the past. It's a new day for Alabama football. Saban had been there since 07, 08, somewhere in there. He was there.
Mm-hmm.
He was there a long time, had a lot of success, won a lot of natties. So I think Kalen DeBoer stepping into this job is probably the biggest, the biggest job that you could take probably outside of Ohio State or Texas. And it's not like you're completely having to bust toss the roster and overhaul it. The only thing you got to do is you got a brand new Corvette sitting in the garage. The only thing you got to do is change the oil, change the spark plugs, and keep it rolling. And I think another big hire that Caleb DeBoer did was Kane Womack as the defensive coordinator, which I think he should be on this list too, just for the simple fact of he was, I believe, the head coach at South Alabama, knows the area real well, and Kalen DeBoer has been successful everywhere he's been. So yeah. I don't think that this is a bad hire. I don't think it's going to be a little bit of wait and see, but there is going to be a ton of expectation and a ton of pressure on him to win. So let's not discount that. This is Earl Bruce taking over for Woody Hayes. This is what this is.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I think it's a huge moment for him and for Alabama for sure. And we'll see. I mean, I think he's coming into a good, and like you mentioned, stepping into the garage with a Corvette, all you have to do is change the oil and fill it with gas and, maintain it. Well, a lot of times that's easier said than done, right? I mean, example or exhibit A is Ryan Day. I mean, he stepped into a really good situation and he's maintained it and in some ways improved it, but he still can't get it done. So it's going to be interesting to see what he does with it, which, mentioning Ryan Day brings us to what CBS Sports and a lot of people think is the
One
most impactful hire.
one last thing before we get to the most impactful hire. The one thing I will say is Ryan Day was a first-time head coach.
That's true.
Kalen DeBoer is not a first-time head coach.
No, yeah, that's 100%
And
true. Yeah.
and he's been around the game a long time. Not to say that Ryan Day hasn't, and
Yeah.
I'm not taking a dump on Ryan Day by any means whenever I say this. I'm just saying that being a first-time head coach at Ohio State, Kalen DeBoer has had many stops. He was at Fresno State at the Division I level. He was at Washington, took Washington to a natty. They hadn't been relevant ever since I was born in the early 90s. So let's see how this goes.
Yeah, I agree. That is a good point. Obviously he's got a little more head coaching experience at that point. So, but the most impactful hire, which I don't disagree with, I think Kalen DeBoer has an argument for number one. But to be completely honest with you, this is the most impactful hire in college football. Chip Kelly, being the offensive coordinator at Ohio State this year, is going to be the most important thing at any program in all of college football this year. And the reason I say that is this is the most important season in Ryan Day's career. This is the most important season in maybe Ohio State history. They've lost to the rival 3 years in a row. He's been there going on year 6 or 7 now and hasn't been able to get a natty. He made the national championship game once. He's successful, but the last 3 years have absolutely put Ohio State in an absolute frenzy because they haven't won the Big Ten, they haven't beat Michigan, they haven't won a natty. Those are 3 things that are expected at least every couple years. Beating Michigan's expected every year. Fans and the program knows it's not going to happen every year forever, but you can't lose 3 in a row. Winning the Big Ten is always the expectation. So the fact that they haven't done any of those things in 3 years, and the number one kind of criticism of Ryan Day has been his inability to give up play calling, to hire an offensive coordinator that he trusts, to give somebody else that responsibility and let him manage the team from a CEO perspective and see if he can be an actual head coach. Ryan Day is a great coach, a great offensive mind. He's hired great recruiters. The problem is he hasn't developed players at a high clip at a lot of positions. He hasn't put the product on the field. It's a tough team that can get it done. I don't care what he says about finding Lou Holtz, and that's a tough team right there. You saw it in the Michigan game again. They weren't tough. They didn't get it done. So bringing in somebody that can take over the play calling and the meeting with the quarterbacks and meeting with the offensive staff and can actually run the offense. Now, Ryan Day is still going to be heavily involved. He's absolutely going to be heavily involved. But he hired somebody that he trusts, that he has a background with, and that is going to be pivotal if Ohio State wants to do anything this season, if they want to accomplish their goals, which has just become even more so a necessity after the 2 greatest living coaches in Ohio State history came out and said, this is the most loaded, most talented roster in Ohio State history. You don't think Jim Tressel and Urban Meyer knew what they were doing when they said that? They are saying, Ryan, it's on you now. You've been given every chance. You've been given every opportunity. You have one of the most talented rosters in the history of the program. You need to go out there and you need to win. And that's why I agree completely that Chip Kelly is the most impactful hire in this offseason because of what it means to one of the biggest programs in the country and what it could mean for Ryan Day and his career.
Well, with all that being said, I don't know if the alarms are going off, but from the Michigan game to the Missouri Bowl game, it was DEFCON 5. It was the ship is going down. Ryan completely overturned the coaching staff to a certain extent.
Mhm.
Fired Parker Fleming, fired Corey Dennis. He can anybody out there. I don't give a shit what you say. Anybody out there can say he didn't fire him or change their role. He fired him.
Yeah.
But also, he's got to look in the mirror as well because he's hired everybody that he's fired.
Mm-hmm.
But aside from Halfley taken off, but
yeah, but he didn't fire him. He just got a head coaching job.
yeah. But when it comes down to this, you mentioned it. No Big Ten, no beating Michigan. This is not conducive for good behavior at Ohio State. And when it's Urban Meyer and it's Jim Tressel saying the buck stops here, and if you guys don't beat Michigan and you don't win the Big Ten or at least make it to the Big Ten championship game, I think you're getting fired.
Oh, I definitely think it's on the table. A loss to
And
Michigan this year would be detrimental.
and you named somebody, an offensive coordinator last year, that I watched on a film breakdown that somebody pointed out that he had his damn play call sheet in the front of his pants the entire game. If that guy if that guy's named the offensive coordinator, he got to contribute somewhere. I don't give a shit if you can recruit, the number one receiver, but if you can't develop anybody, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And you've been part of a coaching staff that has lost to Michigan 3 times. Coming from Urban Meyer that, beat him 7 times in a row. And Jim Tressel's only got 2 or 3 losses to Michigan in his whole 10 years. So the buck stops with Ryan Day, and you got to navigate out of it somehow, because basically my sentiment is that you better win the game.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think everybody knows that. I know for a fact Ryan is extremely aware of that. And that's why he's done the things he's done this offseason. They went out and they spent a boatload on NIL. They got some of the best players in the transfer portal. They went out and they told I don't think he's a great quarterback, but he was a player or two away from beating Michigan and taking them to the playoffs. He told that quarterback, your job is not safe, and sent him packing. Brought in a quarterback that we'll see what he is. But at the end of the day, there's so much talent on this roster that if you can get competent quarterback play with a mobile quarterback that can move around and not just be a statue in the pocket, you have a chance to win every single game on your schedule. They've got a couple tough games. Obviously, Oregon's one, Michigan's another. But outside of that, I mean, they have a pretty easy schedule this year. They just need to get it done. And so losing to Michigan, the only way he gets over losing to Michigan is if somehow Michigan lost a couple, he still wins the Big Ten and potentially wins a natty. But even then, losing 4 in a row to Michigan, there's going to be people in Columbus. Listen, I grew up with it. There's going to be people in Columbus saying that's unacceptable. Yeah, it's great you won a national title. We'll take it, but you got to beat Michigan. The rest is meaningless. People don't understand that aren't in it or doesn't grow up in the rivalry. That rivalry is different. There's only a handful of rivalries in the world that compare to it, and I don't know if any are above it, but that rivalry is different. It means something different for Ohio State and for Michigan, even if Michigan fans didn't want to admit it when they were getting smacked around by Urban every year. But you just can't do that. So I think number one on his list has to be, and that's why when I see players coming out saying it's natty or bust, it's this, it's that, I'm like, guys, you guys are focused on the wrong thing. I agree. You guys should compete for a national title. But the focus, and if Urban Meyer was in that locker room, the only thing you would hear a player say is team up north. We're focused on team up north. Yeah, we're going to focus on every opponent along the way. We're going to lock in for those weeks. But I know for a fact when summer starts, summer conditioning, fall camp, all that stuff, they had the team up north countdown. They had it going. Everybody knew when that game was, and everybody knew that game is the game. That's the game that matters. Everything else you're expected to do, but that game is the one that you have to do.
And I 100% agree with you on that, because that game is in 5 months, 1 week, and 4 days. Not that anybody over here is counting, but I'm just saying you better win that game.
Mm-hmm.
You better
Absolutely.
win that game, or you're going to be. I have a feeling. I think Ross Bjork would fire them all because he is not going to want to hear the heat. And he's not a first time AD, but he is a athletic director that's been at major programs. He was there at Ole Miss when that whole thing turned into a dumpster fire with Hugh Freeze and the prostitutes and all of that song and dance. So the guy knows how to navigate. It's just the fact of you cannot lose this damn ball game.
No.
And I know you have family that's friends with Ryan, but like when I made that phone call last year to that call-in show, I said, if you don't win this game next year, we are tired of losing to that team up north. Pack your bags and go back to New Hampshire and take Chip with you, because that's what's going to happen.
No, I agree. And there's a faction of Columbus and a faction of Ohio State fans that believe he's not going to be able to get it done, because there is a belief, a really strong belief, that if you aren't an Ohio guy, if you haven't grown up in the rivalry, if you haven't been in it, then there's no way you could ever understand it, no matter how many times you coach in it. So you look at the coaches that have succeeded in the rivalry. Woody Hayes, Ohio guy. Earl Bruce, Ohio guy. John Cooper, not an Ohio guy, didn't succeed. Jim Tressel, Ohio guy. Urban Meyer, Ohio guy. Right? So they grew up with it. They knew what it meant. And so there's a faction that'll be saying, listen, he just can't get it done in that game. He doesn't know what it means. And he can say he does, and he can learn all the history, and he can coach in it a million times. But there's something different when you grew up in the state, you grew up in the rivalry. It just means more, as the SEC likes to say.
Yes, it
but
does
move.
mean
More. Yeah, go ahead.
And we're not bashing Brian Day. We're just some of the other shows out there are going to tell you, they're going to blow rainbows and sunshine up your ass and tell you this is the best roster in the world. It could be the best damn roster in the world, but I can tell you this much: if Ryan Day does not beat Michigan, I would not be shocked if people aren't throwing beer cans at him as he's going off the field.
Well, listen, I know I've heard stories, and my family's lived it, man. They'll start putting for sale signs in your fucking yard. All right? Like, if you lose to Michigan a couple times, all of a sudden you come home one day and you're like, why is there a for sale sign in my front yard? And it's because Ohio State fans are telling you, buddy, it's time to go. You had your chance. So
and it's the same thing with Notre Dame and USC. You can't lose that game consistently. On Marcus Freeman's clip, you can't lose that game consistently.
No, and he hasn't. So
Auburn, Alabama, can't lose that one consistently either.
Florida, there's very few that are up there. Yeah, I mean, there's very few that are at that level, and I would argue that maybe only Alabama, Auburn is even close to Ohio State, Michigan. I think Notre Dame, USC is a great rivalry, don't get me wrong, but I've seen Notre Dame get dominated for periods of time, and they switched coaches. They just continued to lose when Pete Carroll was there and whatnot. But it's just, man, there's just something different about it. But not to harp on that too much here. We can get into some Notre Dame stuff now and kind of run through a little state of the program, a little update for everybody as we get into summer conditioning, summer workouts, and move towards fall camp. I think we're only 5 weeks away, 6 weeks away, or something like that. So, it'll be here before you know it. And one thing, I know we've talked about it. We each went through the schedule and kind of gave our predictions of what we think Notre Dame will do. I know there's some people that, don't understand how we could say that they have the opportunity to go 12-0, but also say Marcus Freeman could be on the hot seat if he doesn't succeed this year. But those are two different conversations. But Sports Illustrated came out today, I believe it was. Pete Futek, who is a pretty good reporter for Sports Illustrated, talked about Notre Dame's over-under wins, which I believe you and I have talked about is at 10.5, right? And
yes,
I wanted to get your take on this. He's saying to hammer the under.
Well, hammering the under, to me, now, do you want me to look at this as a gambling perspective? Because I do that from time to time. On a gambler's perspective, that I would look at this, the reason why I would take the under at 10.5 is just for the simple fact of Marcus has had the hiccups on the road
Exactly.
because I think in the USC game you can throw the records out,
Mm-hmm.
and I also do not like Texas A&M week 1 because you only need 2.
Yeah, and they
Like he
essentially, yeah.
like he states in the article, you
Mm-hmm.
only need 2, and
Yeah.
those 2 are glaring weaknesses. And then you also have Florida State coming to town. I know some people are down on Florida State a little bit, but that is what it is, and we're not going to debate Florida State
No,
at
that's a tough
nauseum.
game no matter what.
And but it helps it's at home, and
Mm-hmm.
uh, Louisville's
No.
also
Mm-hmm.
another wild card. So you have some games that are wild card games that if you break it down and look at it, they could go either way.
Yeah,
Now,
absolutely, and that's what he says in the article, which is why I'm not going to sit here and dog cuss Pete Futek, because he's absolutely right. 10.5 is a really high bar for over-unders, right? 10-2 and a playoff berth would be a successful season for Marcus Freeman.
100%
Now,
agree.
do I think he has the potential of going 11-1, 12-0? Absolutely. There's no doubt. I think USC is not as good as people want to believe they are, and they haven't been for a while, even when they had, quote unquote, the best quarterback in college football, which they don't anymore. However, that's still USC. It's in LA, last week of the season. You could be talking about if they go into that game 10-1, knowing that there's no conference title game, probably at 10-1, even if you go to 11-1, that doesn't change your seeding that much. And your seeding doesn't even matter because there's no way to get a bye, right? So Notre Dame could walk into that game pretty much locked up with a playoff spot. Not saying they're going to rest guys and they're not going to take the game seriously because it is a rivalry game. They definitely want to win it. But USC could be going into that game fighting for a playoff spot and really need to win it. So that's absolutely a game that they could lose. I don't think they will. And then obviously Texas A&M week 1, it's early in the year. It's at Kyle Field. It's under the lights. That's just a toss-up. I mean, I think Notre Dame's the better team. I think Notre Dame comes out and wins. I hope they go out and they set the tone for what this team's going to be. But you have 3 really losable games, right? You have Texas A&M, Florida State, and USC, with a couple other, games that obviously we've seen in the past. Notre Dame have hiccups against teams that they should have beat. So I definitely understand the gambling perspective of it. However, I'm staying away from it. I'm not touching it. Part of that's because I don't like betting on Notre Dame because my heart is invested in it, and I don't like betting against my heart or with my heart, really, because it seems to never work. But I think ultimately I believe they go 11-1, and I'm gonna be really pissed off if they go 11-1 and I bet under 10.5.
Yeah, I could see where that could be a issue. I just, a lot of it is, to me, it comes down to the number on regular season win totals when I look at those future bets like that.
Mm-hmm.
And you never know. I'm not wishing bad on anybody, but Riley Leonard could go out there and pull a Kirk Barton and tear his hamstring off the bone.
Yeah.
And then what do? Then nobody knows, and
Mm-hmm.
it's shot in the ass at that point. So
Yeah.
nobody expected Jordan Travis last year to completely explode his ankle.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's obviously injuries are part of the game, and Riley Leonard has a little bit of a history with them at this point. Obviously, had the surgeries during the offseason. Although I've read that he's fully back up to speed, he's ready to go. He'll be good to go by fall camp, 100%, nothing to worry about. However, that doesn't mean that the ankle is going to be the injury this year or that there isn't something else that could happen. But yeah, I just thought that I don't disagree with his take to take the under as from a gambling perspective. I just think if I was gambling on anything, probably wouldn't be that one specifically.
I'd take Miami win total over.
What's their over under at? I don't even know.
I want to say it might be 9.5. Somebody in the chat, if you're out there and have access to Miami's the over under wins totals, put it in the chat, please, because I think it's 9.5. I want to say.
Man,
Might be
Miami
8.5.
always fucks it up though. But anyways, yeah, I mean I think Miami has a shot, but another thing, yeah, Cam Ward, we'll see. I mean, Miami, who knows, man? I can never tell with those guys. Every year they're back, and then they never are. But
well, their fans aren't back. If you've seen a home game, they're all dressed as empty seats, except on Twitter.
Well, yeah, nobody wants to go to that place.
And you always have to. You can't discredit the Wolverines, the Wolverines that are Hurricane fans.
Oh yeah, for sure. But another thing that came out today was they went through and ranked all the top position groups in the country. Notre Dame had a couple that got unanimous votes. Let me put it up here for everybody that hasn't seen it. But I found this interesting because I think there's one position group that was almost unanimous that I'm curious your thoughts on specifically. But so if you guys can see that, obviously, number one, the two groups that were unanimous across all four publications were the defensive line and the defensive backs, which I think everybody has heard us talk about that. I think those are the two strongest positions on the team. Defensive line is going to be really good, I believe. Obviously ranked as high as 4, as low as 11. Defensive backs as well. I think that could be a strong suit. The defense is going to be pretty solid. You can see linebackers were almost unanimous. Defensive backs, you had them as high as 3, as low as 9. Anywhere from 3 to 9, usually around that 6 mark. But other than that, not really ranked in a lot of other places except one, which I found this really interesting because of the uncertainty with Riley Leonard and his health, and then also really what he could be in this offense. And just we haven't seen. I mean, we've seen enough from him to know that he's a serviceable quarterback when he's healthy, but the quarterback position is top 10 in 3 of the 4 lists, which I thought was very interesting.
Quarterback, I'm not shocked being that high. Now, the position group that I'm shocked the most about is running back, but I'm not shocked that it's ranked so low just because they have, the 215 or 220 carries that they got to divvy up between the guys, and then they had a guy go down. So I think if I had to disagree anywhere is I would go wide receivers ranked really high.
You would rank them really high?
No, I think they're ranked really high.
I mean, that's just Phil Steele. I don't know if I'd put a whole lot of weight in that. But yeah, but I think the wide receiver group has a chance to be better than people think. I wouldn't put them top 10 in the country, though. But yeah, running backs, it seems to me that running back is consistently, this is what happens to Notre Dame. I'm pretty confident that Notre Dame fans and the program and everybody knows that running back room is pretty solid, even with the injury that they sustained. But they lost Audric Estime, which is a huge question mark if they can replace that. But they also lost Kyron Williams, and there was a huge question mark if they could replace that. And Audric Estime stepped up and did. So I believe in the pedigree that is Notre Dame running backs the past few years. So I'm pretty high on the running back position. I also was surprised that the tight end position is not ranked higher. I mean, obviously number 6 and on 3, but not ranked at all in the other 3. I think that's a pretty big strong suit for Notre Dame right now as their tight end position. So that one was interesting to me as well.
And I think Notre Dame's going to be really good at the tight end position. I think they have a really good tight end room, really underrated. And they're not big flashy names like a Brock Bowers, but I think all the guys in that room have pretty decent ball skills. They catch the ball really well, block really well. So I'm not shocked by that. Now, the position group, when you sent this to me that I was like not shocked at all, was offensive line. I think it's ranked too high because I think the offensive line is going to be they're going to have to figure it out up front.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of question marks in the offensive line, but I think there's a lot of talent too. And this is exactly what I was talking about. Jacob just said it. Exactly. Mitchell Evans himself, I mean, that I've seen him ranked as high as the number 2 tight end in the country. So if you have the second best tight end in the country, and they do have depth at that position, to not have him ranked top 10 across the board was a little surprising to me. I think he's a really good player that is absolutely brings that room up to top 10 level, because I don't think there's not a Brock Bowers in the country anymore. There's some good tight ends at other programs, but I think that was surprising. But back to the O-line, obviously they have to fill some holes, losing people like Joe Alt. They have returners at a couple positions, but I think there's an understanding or a belief in Notre Dame's offensive line development that they don't really have bad offensive lines. Like, they typically figure it out. Even if they have a down year, they still have a pretty solid offensive line. That's just the pedigree that is there. They put out NFL talent all the time. So I think they get a boost because of that, probably. But I think the talent's there. It's an unknown talent right now.
Right. Could the offensive line be better? But it could. But I just don't like the fact going into a new season, starting 2 new tackles, and the interior last year struggled. I watched that on Coach's film. I watched it on Coach's film. The interior offensive line, guard, center, got manhandled by NC State up front. So
NC State had some dudes on that interior defensive line, though. But yeah, I agree. I think that's a question mark. But again, I think just knowing what Notre Dame continues to do at the offensive line position and even tight end position, I think they get the benefit of the doubt because of that. Now, wide receivers, you don't get the benefit of the doubt. You guys haven't put out, other than Chase Claypool, who's a bum, which I liked Chase Claypool in college. I thought he was going to be a really good pro, but he is a head case apparently. But anyways, I just thought that was interesting. Having two position groups that are unanimously ranked, and then obviously there's some question marks on the offensive side specifically. Defensive side is exactly what I thought it would be, pretty highly ranked, because I think it's going to be one of the best defenses in college football.
I think Phil Steele's an asshole for ranking the linebackers 24th. That's just my opinion. And let me throw this up here. I agree with you, Jacob, but the thing I want to see out of that is what is it going to look like on tape, and what is it going to look like against the big old boys down there at Texas A&M?
Mm-hmm. Well, that you just have to trust the coaching, right? And you have one of the best offensive line coaches in the country, so trust in him, and we'll see. But Phil Steele is an interesting one. He ranks the linebackers 24th, which I think is super low, but then turn around and ranks the wide receivers 10th, which I think is super high. So I don't know if he's a Notre Dame guy or not, but regardless of that, that was just an interesting. I think it lines up pretty well with what I thought about the team so far. I think there's some discrepancies. Yeah, I believe that. But the other three publications didn't even rank the offensive line in the top 50 or whatever the cutoff was. So he obviously at least had them in there. But it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But want to get on our last topic for the day, and kind of the topic du jour. We touched on it a little bit with the Elite 11 talk, but want to give an update on Deuce Knight and just kind of where he's at, his mental. Obviously still committed to Notre Dame. There's one of us here on the platform that said the decommitment was imminent and expected in any day now, and it hasn't happened. I won't name names, but obviously, yeah. He had an official visit to Notre Dame this past week or weekend, and really was interested in kind of what he had to say. Obviously, take it for what it's worth. He's talking to Notre Dame reporters. He's obviously not going to be like, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to go here. But the first thing that I noticed is he was on campus, and he's been on campus a lot. He has a great relationship with the staff. He talked a lot about meeting with the coaches and how now it's not about building that relationship with the coaches because he already has that relationship. Now they're talking ball. I mean, Mike Danbrock is talking how he fits in the system, talking about what is they're getting into kind of the nitty gritty of it, which I love. I think that's something. If this kid is half of what I think he is as far as a player and just a student of the game, then I think he loves that. He loves going to meet with these guys and just talk ball and really get an insight into how these guys think about the offense and about how he could play in this system. So I thought that was very positive. Just to go off he was obviously asked, because he's always going to be asked, where his commitment stands. And he just said his commitment is great. He feels like it's great with Notre Dame. He got to hang out with a lot of the other commits and recruits and just overall really good. Really just talking about the offense and the fit. Obviously, he sees a lot of Jaden Daniels in himself, so Denbrock can really sell that to him. One of the most interesting things I thought is they talked to him about other schools coming on and recruiting him. And he said that's something that they like because it means I'm doing something right if other schools are still trying to get me. And I think that's a really interesting quote, an important quote, because that gives you the mindset and confidence that Notre Dame has recruiting kids right now. They're like, cool, Ole Miss wants to recruit you. Georgia wants to get in. Awesome. That means you're doing something right and that we got you and you're the right fit. And they don't twist it as like, dude, don't even pay attention to those other schools, right? That's an insecurity thing if you try to spin it that way. They use it as a positive. And so that's an interesting way to go about it, I thought. Obviously, just really, really great visit from what it sounds like. One of the things that I think is telling about him, and Jacob said it right here, is he came up 3 days early before his official visit to recruit other kids in his class, right? And I've said this pretty frequently on this show. I've heard reports and I've talked to people that have been talking to the kid and talking to other recruits, and Deuce Knight is doing a better job recruiting the 2025 class than some of the coaches on staff. I mean, he is going out there and he's getting kids. And so that speaks volumes. I think it does make it a little fragile if you lose them, because you could potentially lose other kids because of that, obviously. But yeah, just overall, man, just great visit. The one thing he said that I think is not cause for concern, but makes me think that he is very committed, very, very strong, wants to go to Notre Dame. But he said, I want to see what they're going to do. You can have the scheme, but you have to have the players. We have the receivers this year. Notre Dame's always been a big tight end team. I think they're going to do big things this year. What that tells me is he's going to be watching this year in this offense. And if this offense doesn't perform up to a level that he thinks it should, he might start thinking about other programs that are maybe performing better on the offensive side of the ball, because he's like, yeah, I thought they were going to be really good. And he wants to see what this Denbrock system looks like at Notre Dame.
Well, we'll see how this pans out. It's one of those things that I don't trust. You can commit, you can say what you want, but there's no definite until signing day. After signing day, it's a lot of speculation, because Jeremiah Smith, Ohio State almost lost him last year to Florida State. So, and he was the number one kid in the country, in my opinion. But, I think it's, I think a lot of times people do not want to hear this. It comes down to money.
I think it does for a lot of kids. I'm not 100%, and I don't think the money's going to be that different. I think Notre Dame will be able to put together an NIL package for somebody of this caliber that'll compete with anybody in the country. But everything I've read, I don't think it comes down to money for him solely. I think that's a part, and I think he'll get a good NIL package. But just the kid, from what I've read, and again, I know he's talking to reporters. He's going to say what he thinks he should say, and behind closed doors, he might be saying something totally different. But I believe that he has a different mindset than some of these kids. And I think that's why he committed to Notre Dame in the first place, because a lot of times Notre Dame doesn't get the kids that have the same mindset as other top talents in the country. There you go. And the mom, I learned this from my brother. If you want to get a kid, get his mom, because that's the number one. The dad is great and he'll influence, but there's something different about a mother-son relationship, especially when it comes to these football players. If you want to get a kid, get his mom. And so if that's true and Marcus has Deuce's mom locked down, I think Deuce is a lock. I agree with you. But again, it'll be interesting to see. I do think one of the really cool things that tells me he is pretty solid in his commitment is that he came up early and he is recruiting the shit out of this class for Notre Dame. He talked about Ike Taylor's kid, said that he got to hang out with him a bit this weekend on his official visit, said he thinks that he's going to keep him. He doesn't think that he's going to flip. Obviously, that's just his opinion. And then he talked a little bit about who he thought the next commits will be, which we can get in real quick before we wrap up. So the two commits that he's really looking at, and I think I want to talk about, obviously, the recruiting class as a whole is exceptional so far. Was the number one ranked class until Ohio State got a couple booms, and now we're looking at most places have it between 2 and 5, which is still a phenomenal class. If Notre Dame finishes with the number 2 class in the country, it's one of the best years they've had in ever. But when you look at it, I mean, the way recruits that are committed to Notre Dame or thinking about commit talk about Deuce Knight, like Owen Streberg said, he's definitely the leader of the class. He's perfect representation of what a Notre Dame quarterback should be, etc. But the guys that he thinks that are next for Notre Dame, and this is straight from Deuce Knight's mouth, are Jadon Blair and Derek Meadows. He said, hopefully Derek Meadows. But I think if you can get Jadon Blair and Derek Meadows, both highly ranked 4 stars, top 200 kids, that would really round out this class. And that would put you at 23, 24 recruits. Obviously, pick up another 1 or 2 if you have the room. And obviously, hopefully you don't lose anybody like Dallas Golden or anybody like that. But I think Jadon Blair is a phenomenal athlete, a phenomenal player. I think Derek Meadows could be the key to the success of this class outside of Deuce Knight. So those are the 2 to look out for. Hopefully in the next couple of days, you'll see. I believe both of them were on campus this weekend. And so Jadon Blair looking at like a July 5th commitment date, and then Derek Meadows sometimes later in July. And just hopefully if we can land both those kids, I think this class is going to be up pushing top 5 for sure.
Right. I don't disagree. The big thing that if everything stays as it should, this should be probably Notre Dame's best recruiting class in 15 years?
Probably. I'd have to go back. I know Brian Kelly had some good classes. Charlie Weiss had some really good classes. So I know they've recruited at a pretty high level for the past 15 years. I mean, not top 5 consistently, but they might have had 1 or 2 in there. But this is definitely competing for the best class in, 15, 20 years.
I'm just gonna hold firm with my prediction whether Deuce flips. There's a lot that hinges on it, and I'm gonna leave it alone and just let it ride. I said what I said, and that's what it is. And some people disagree, some people agree. I know some people, and that's that. But as far as the Meadow kid goes, I think that would probably be a huge get as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. He and him and Deuce have a good relationship, which again, I know a lot of this is based on Deuce Knight, committing to Notre Dame. But I think even if you lose Deuce Knight, which I've been on record and I don't believe is going to happen, even if you lose them, I think these kids are being recruited by Notre Dame, not just Deuce Knight. So I don't think you're going to lose a ton of them. I think it opens up that some of them might flip, like an Ike Taylor or an Ivan Taylor or Dallas Golden. But I think some of these other kids that are truly committed to Notre Dame would stick. So I think either way, it's going to be a really nice class. And I agree. I think it's going to be one of the best classes in the country, no matter what happens. Obviously, losing Deuce Knight would push it down the rankings quite a bit, but
and the last thing I got on the Ivan Taylor and Deuce Knight, I wouldn't be shocked if Alabama comes in late.
Yeah, I know, and that's definitely a possibility. I did see, I don't know if you saw it, but I did see the 3 NFL sons with their dads posing for pictures at Notre Dame. And I think there is somewhat of a camaraderie between those 3 kids being, sons of NFL players. And so going to the same school together might have a little bit of a pull, right? Like, hey, you guys know what I've been through in my life. You guys are from, a similar background where my dad was in the NFL. They were, all 3 were pretty great players. Jerome Bettis is a Hall of Famer. Ike Taylor was a very solid corner. Plexico Burris, I don't believe is a Hall of Famer, but he was a really good receiver for a long time for the Giants and the Steelers, outside of when he shot himself in the leg. But it seems like his leg's fine now. He's standing on both feet. So,
well, also, I believe all 3 of them might have been teammates together in Pittsburgh. I don't know if Plex was there, but I know Plex was there with Jerome, but I don't know if he was there with Ike Taylor. I'd have to go back and look.
Yeah, I believe so. Ike Taylor was there for quite a while.
Yeah,
but
so,
regardless of that, we'll see what happens. Obviously, recruiting is a fickle bitch. So you never know, it come out tomorrow that so-and-so decommits or whatever, just like that kid at USC that decommitted. So it happens all the time. Obviously, it's June 19th. None of this is written in stone until we get to that December signing day. And hopefully for the next 6 months or so, you just got to keep recruiting them as if they aren't committed and keep telling them, to stay true to what they believe and the reason they committed there in the first place, and keep showing them, what Notre Dame has to offer.
Right on. Again, you ready to wrap it up, Carter?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I appreciate everybody coming out and interacting with us. I love when you guys can get in the chat and kind of throw some stuff at us. I'd like to think on my feet, so I love it. But if you guys could just take a second, just like the show, that helps drive it. Subscribe if you haven't. And we do this weekly. We're going to ramp it up for in season, probably do it a couple times a week, and really just try to get out here and have a conversation with you guys and entertain people. And if it's not entertaining, tell us.
Like Carter said, hit the like and subscribe, and we'll be going on college football and the NFL. So expect some more stuff from us going forward, and follow us on Twitter, follow us on TikTok, follow us everywhere you can find us. So, and we also, if you don't like the YouTube version, we are also on PodBean, Spotify, and Apple Music. And Carter will have the show uploaded tonight. So if you only caught a snippet of it and want to hear some past things, but just bear with me. The farther you go back, the worse the show is. So we're trying to put our best foot forward here. But thanks again, everybody. Have a good evening.